Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass. Man, I tell you what, this transgender issue in bathrooms and restrooms has really taken the headlines, has it not? This is a huge complex issue. On one hand, on the other hand, it's pretty simple. Let me start with the simple part. I have never done a podcast on anything political, and so I'm not going to spend much energy doing that right now. But a few people have sent me emails and tweets and whatever, asked my opinion about it, so I'm giving it. It seems to me that regardless of the intentions of the law to help make sure everyone has an equitable choice at restrooms, that people will, in fact, abuse that privilege. That if I can say, walking into a restroom at Target or anywhere else, I identify as a woman so that I can go to the woman's restroom, it will be abused. There will be voyeurs, there will be pedophiles who love that law. I just heard and read the other day, in fact, in Canada, who are way ahead of America on this view. They've had transgender and neutral bathrooms and so forth for a long time. They're now rescinding those orders because of the arrests that are being made repeatedly of voyeurs, men going into them. One in particular that I heard about was about how men were putting their cell phones over shower stalls at women's restrooms. Now think about that. First it's restrooms. The next is going to be gyms and showers. Imagine at the YMCA or your local Planet Fitness or wherever you work out having gender-neutral showers. And all I have to do is identify with a woman to go in there. Imagine what will happen with the people who want to take advantage of that. It means that very few people will start taking showers ever again or begin or continue taking showers there. The restrooms will be boycotted. Whole gyms will shut down until they build gender-neutral, individual, locked shower stalls or something. I mean, it's going to be chaos if this goes down its logical course. So, unfortunately, if we have the capacity to say, I identify as another gender, to visit that other gender's restroom, people will take advantage of it. And that's exactly why I think it should not be done. So then what should we do for people who don't want that? Well, then we should just have a bunch of restrooms that are non-gendered, that are individually locked. That Target doesn't have 2 restrooms. We've got 28 of them individually locked with no designation, like a lot of businesses have. That's fine. The problem is for most transgender, that's not enough. They want one that says man so that the woman who identifies as a man can go to the man's restroom. They want that, I guess validation is the right word. What I appreciate and what I understand very much is that the United States courts, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, are trying to keep it as equitable as possible. Equitable, such as the reason why it's legal mandated to have handicap ramps, so that it's equitable for all people to go into a store or going to a restaurant or whatever the place may be. Certain locations have to have a handicapped elevator so that it's equitable. I mean, that's what America tries to do, and I appreciate that. They try to make it equitable. The problem here, of course, is that a very, 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 very small minority of America's population, their feelings, the feelings of a very, very, very small minority of the nation, is being the dominant view to overrule and override the very, very, very large majority of people. What I mean is, in order not to offend a small portion of the population, we are offending the majority of the population. I don't want a woman identifying as a man to come in the restroom where I am. I don't want my children. I don't want my wife to be in the restroom with a baby girl when a man comes in and says, hey, I identify as a woman. I don't want that. And the reason why I don't want it is not because of transgenders. I don't want it because of the abuse that will occur. The abuse that is, you might say, the liars, the people who really aren't transgender. I'll just give you the benefit of the doubt. The people who are not. It creates safety concerns. So that offends me. In America, everyone's offended about everything. And that's why I never use the word, because it sounds so stupid. Everyone's offended at everything. Right now, you've already been offended at this podcast to some degree. But if you want to say who's offended, well, I'm offended. Now I'm offended because they're The attempt not to hurt their feelings hurts my feelings. Well, then who's right? So what we need to do is be equitable as possible. And so I appreciate the need to be equitable. I also appreciate the need to be safe. And it is not a transgender's fault for people who want to abuse the system. It's not their fault. So we need to be very clear about that. Transgenders aren't by default a threat. It's those who want to take advantage of the system. And it is to those people now that I am most offended, the ones who want to take advantage of it. And that's what's unfortunate. And so I hope that it does not become the law of the land, which I have a suspicion it will be very soon, because that's what our culture does. I have a suspicion very soon it will be anybody can walk into any restroom at any given time, which means, of course, from now on, probably my children will just go to the restroom at home. We won't go anywhere else unless my wife's with them or I'm with them in the room, or I'll just walk in with my daughter and say, I'm sorry, I'm not transgender, but I'm protecting my daughter. And it's going to happen. And it's unfortunate because I know that's not fair to all the transgenders to be given all the heat and all the crap and all the junk that's coming their way as if it's their fault that people want to abuse it. And I don't think that's fair to them, but nevertheless, that's what's going to happen. Let me say one, I think, quick thing about this. In Christianity, it's just not so clear about exactly what the ethics are when it comes to identity issues. Let me say this. In the New Testament, and the Old Testament as well, they do assume that there is male and female. And yes, the average Jewish person throughout all of history, and Christianity for all of history, defined gender roles by physiology. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that's it. So you have a vulva or a penis. That's boy or girl. But what's changed over time is our understanding of how gender roles and gender identity is given. And now what's happened is the DNA is now XX or XY chromosome. But moreover, not only just physiologically, we've changed our understanding to define, besides just what appendages we have on us, or is psychologists have discovered that for a long, long time, they've come up with something called gender identity. Now, gender identity is a personal conception of if you're a male or female. And sometimes they might say, I don't have a gender, or I'm neither, or I'm both. But that's extremely, extremely rare. But gender identity is your psychological stance of your own gender. Now, this is related, but not the same, of a gender role. A gender role is typically how you are to behave on the outside. And gender identity is not the same thing as your, what they're called biological gender. So, in other words, a person can say they identify as a woman, that's their gender identity, regardless of their physiology. And this, in short, as far as I understand, for the reading I've done, this has come about in psychology, this gender identity concept, because for a long, 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 long time, they have met patients and clients who said, for as long back as I can remember, I feel like I'm let's say it's a boy who says, I feel like I'm a girl trapped in a boy's body. Now, for a long time, that was considered various disorders, gender identity disorder. But because of American culture, and disorder sounds like a bad word, sounds like we're being judgmental, sounds like we're being closed-minded, you're a bigot. Now the word disorder has bad connotations. And now it's even difficult for certain quote-unquote disorders to make it into the DSM-4 and 5 and eventually going to be 6, because they are very, very concerned with the stigma that the word disorder has with it. So in general now that's been dropped. So now the person just has gender identity. They don't have a disorder, they have gender identity. So their gender identity is just accepted. So David, can say, I identify as a woman. A white person can say, apparently, from the woman on the news, she identifies with a black person. She thinks she is a black person. And for a long time, and this is going to sound hateful, I don't mean it hateful, but for a long time, in fact, in insane asylums all over the world, there are people who identify as horses. They identify as Jesus. They identify as a crock pot. They identify as a tree. And these people are locked up in insane asylums. But instead, what we do now is you can identify with a different race and a different gender and not be considered suffering from a delusional state. Now, whether or not you think that's fair or right or wrong is up to you and up to the specialist. That's up to you. All I know is that today, gender identity is now standard psychological vocabulary and study for quite some time now. And biblically speaking, gender identity is irrelevant. What matters in the biblical text is what a person does with their bodies and their genitalia. So if one person has a penis, he shouldn't mess around with someone else's penis. If a woman has a vulva, she shouldn't mess around with someone else's vulva. Regardless of their identity, regardless of their attractions, regardless of their upbringing, regardless of their culture, regardless of their desires, the same physiology doesn't mess with the other same physiology from a biblical perspective. So what is not a sinful issue is gender identity. It's a psychological issue, something for which I think I have quite sympathy and empathy for people who suffer from this, particularly when it comes to transgender, because so many of them have high suicide rate, and that is horrible, not to mention the amount of abuse they have to put up with, which is extremely un-Christian, that people would ever make fun of them, would ever make fun of anybody. So Christians ought to be real clear about this. The Bible doesn't talk about gender identity. It talks about behavior with what you do with your body. Let me say another thing very quickly. A lot of Christians also say, well, look at the chromosomes. Look at the chromosome settles it all. I don't think it does. I think back, I've seen some documentaries. I remember this one show I saw of a girl on the outside. I think she's in college. She's early 20s. And, nice looking, normal looking brunette girl and a normal, nice looking white family and a nice big house. And they were having dinner and whatever. The girl was, again, in her early 20s. She was actually a boy. She actually has the XY chromosome. Genetically, she is a boy. But in utero, in the womb, her brain did not process and respond to the testosterone produced. Therefore, since we all start out early on with that XX chromosome, you might say, not with the chromosomes, but we start out with more, before the testosterone kicks in for the males, her body continued to develop as a girl. So she is the XY chromosome, but physically speaking, she has fully functioning physiology of a woman, uterus, everything. So there's a confusion, but psychologists say in her gender identity, she says, I'm a girl, I'm a female. Physically, she's a girl, but in her chromosomes, she's a male. She's a boy, a man. At this stage, I guess you say a man because she's early 20s. So when Christians say just test the chromosome, that's also not so simple. Now, granted, this would affect a very, 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 very small portion of society. All I'm saying is, before we make up hard rules about it, it's not always so clear. So what do we do about that? What do people do who have different genitalia, or early on when they have to assign it? That's a very difficult thing for a lot of family members. And families struggle with this because if they have both, you're not really sure how their gender identity will develop. They're not sure exactly which hormones will increase or decrease and so forth. And so there's a huge risk there. And my view is we have grace. We're not always clear exactly how they'll end up. Sometimes, and I'm not giving all the studies, I thought about that, but I've done research on all this. It's not uncommon for a person to say they have both a vulva and a penis, and then they keep the penis, to grow up and realize they identify as a girl. And they develop breasts and so forth. Well, then they feel horrible because they have to have a penis and they have to go back and do another surgery. It's a very delicate, sensitive, traumatic thing to go through. And it is. And I think the Christian view there is we do the best job we can. We prayerfully consider, we take the best advice of the best medical professionals, and we go from there. You say, well, David, what if the person in that case ends up feeling like a girl but has a penis, but the biblical perspective is now a boy and can't mess around with that? To that I say, I'm not so sure. I would say in that particular case, when they're born with both genitalia, in that case I would say, no, you were born with both, and it's a 50-50 shot, and they went the wrong direction. I mean, that's what happened. But there's no Bible verse for this. I'm telling you, that's the deal. It's not a concept that's brought up in the Bible. So in those rare instances, we do the best job what we can. And surely God knows the difference when we get to the world to come. A person still can be a disciple of Jesus and say, based on the best available evidence I had, They picked the wrong appendage. Not appendage, but they got the wrong genitalia. But for everyone else, when it comes to gender identity, biblically speaking, all that matters is behavior. No matter what your desire is, no matter what your attraction is, it's just a behavior issue. I didn't write it. I know some of you right now are very, very mad at me if you've listened this far, but I didn't write it. All I know is throughout the New Testament, that's the view. That's just the view of the New Testament. So when it comes to transgenders in the restroom, unfortunately, they're going to get a lot of heat for the people who abuse it. And that's going to be very unfortunate. We Christians should be in front of them blocking the stones. In front of them blocking the stones so that they're not all alone and not blamed for the pedophiles and blamed for the voyeurs. It's not their fault. Instead, we should be in between them and the haters. We should be as kind and courteous and loving as possible. Absolutely. Absolutely. We shouldn't make jokes. Shouldn't go on Facebook and do huge rants and rages about. We shouldn't do that. And let's hope and pray. And you can talk to your elected governor officials and try to come up with the most equitable way in this morass. We can hopefully get some clarity on it. Well, that's all my quick views on that. Maybe later on do some more podcasts, but that's all for now. In the meantime, let's keep praying together for our country and for transgender and for all those who suffer from different confusing issues of gender identity and physical conditions and so forth. Let's be a support for them as much as possible. See you next time. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com. If you look at the top, you'll see various tabs that have sermons I've preached, a link to all the podcasts I've done so far, a link to my consulting website. For more information about my consulting, see davidpendergrassconsulting.com. Also, you'll see information about the books I've written that are found on amazon.com. So davidpendergrass.com, one-stop shop, all that you need. If you want to reach out to me, follow me on Twitter at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, and send me a message. I'll see you online. I gotta run and tell about what the Lord has done for me.